whenever it was raised with Cambridge authorities or with the people that gave him his PhD or with Glasgow, which gave him a professorship, they basically said it's racism to even question this. And that's the problem in a nutshell.
Let's move on to talk about the saga that's been playing out in the newspapers all week. This is the University of Cambridge. It's going to review its processes for appointing senior academics after Professor Jason Arday resigned following scrutiny over allegations of plagiarism. Arday was appointed Professor of Sociology of Education there in 2023 and became the university's youngest black professor. While this is just one specific and remarkable case, it has reignited the debate about standards in academia amid suggestions that woke ideology might have contributed to Arday's career progression to date. Kathleen, it goes without saying, after what you went through with cancel culture, you will have strong views about this.
Yes, I have strong views. I've written about it myself in recent weeks. I think the thing for me is that there's new details emerging every day now, and probably will for the next fortnight, because the guy has done so many interviews and told so many tall stories that there's just going to be and his memoirs coming out. But the thing to hang on to is that a lot of the original complaints about plagiarism, about potential fraud, and these tall tales that couldn't possibly be true were in the public domain for years. And many people had suspicions about them. But whenever it was raised with Cambridge authorities or with the people that gave him his PhD or with Glasgow, which gave him a professorship, they basically said it's racism to even question this. And that's the problem in a nutshell. For too long, this kind of gross idea that you cannot care about academic excellence, you must be a racist if you have questions about such egregious mistakes, and that's charitable. That's just got to stop. That kind of, they've been getting away with it too long, and I'm really glad to see that this case is appalling, but it is bringing that fact out to the light, which people need to see.
And you think it's prevalent, Kathleen? It's not a one-off, it's not a unique. I mean, there was a Cambridge academic on The Breakfast Show this morning robustly defending Cambridge's recruitment procedures and, wanting an urgent investigation because they thought this was an exceptional case rather than the norm.
It is and it isn't. I mean, someone like Arday doesn't come along very often. He's an incredible character. People don't lie or make up stories like that very often because they're worried about getting away with it, and he doesn't seem to have been worried about that. However, I do think there is a general soggy culture in academic circles these days which doesn't really care so much about the old things like being able to tell an incredibly clear argument or making an original contribution to thought. They don't care about those things so much as are the morals in the right place? Are the politics in the right place? And is the person who's written it, do they have enough protected characteristics? And those things cannot, work together. Prioritizing the latter set will inevitably undermine the excellence, the rigor, and the knowledge production. So, yeah, that is more widespread.
I mean, Libby, where do we start with this? We know what Kathleen went through. We've seen this Jason Arday case. We worry about free speech on campus. We worry about political correctness in terms of hiring our academics. Are our universities rotten, or can they be turned around?
Oh, I think this will be a kind of cleaning of the Augean stables with a great flood. Isn't that what Hercules put a flood through his stables? I think there will be a great deal of change as a result of this in people's attitudes, and people will be a bit more careful about shouting racism the moment anybody criticises plain sloppiness. But I was fascinated, obviously, as a journalist who constantly is having to write things and quote things and pass things on, how sloppy he was. It was the detail of the sloppiness which really bothered me, that none of these clever people appointing him and praising him could be bothered to notice this, that he would give the same quote to two different characters of different ethnicities and ages because it fitted into his theme. It was just sloppy and idle and vain and all the things which universities should pick up on. I remember interviewing years and years ago when I was very young woman, and people don't usually turn on young women for the same kind of reason, that you don't, you aren't racist towards people. And I just remember this academic saying, no, you silly little girl, you've got the wrong end of the stick, let me explain. In the course of an interview. Obviously, I was wounded at the time. I remember thinking, yeah, that's quite good. If somebody is being really stupid and getting the wrong end of the stick, you should, you're an academic. You defend it, defend the truth, defend what's real.
I mean, I think when you look at this case, I can't help thinking that a lot of these academics were so starstruck. He was such a break from the norm that they overlooked all the obvious red flags.
Cambridge Dons are calling for an inquiry into the Jason Arday case, suggesting that the appointment of the professor, who resigned this week over claims of plagiarism, was a quick fix to address diversity issues. The university's been criticised for parading Arday due to his race and his youth and his transformative potential. He has now resigned. It's a story that has hooked our listeners and Times readers all week. We know that from the stats, that people are really intrigued by what happened here, Rebecca, how it was possible that it should happen, and crucially, what should happen next. Are you any clearer on where this went so badly wrong and how?
I think they're all really valid questions, aren't they? I mean, I think that the interest in this story is disproportionate to what's happened. I don't know if at any other time of the year, or if this academic had been white, whether we would be poring over their, slightly embellished history, or worried quite so much about plagiarism on papers about critical race theory. I think the tragedy of this story is that it's been sort of hijacked by people who are anti the DEI agenda, and those are people who are kind of white and privileged, for whom they think that sort of diversity eats away at their privilege, when really it is just about making society more equitable. I think the point around the timing of his appointment is really important. It was in just following the sort of the George Floyd moment, when BLM and diversity was an incredibly necessary conversation, and institutions like Cambridge are not famed for their diversity, whether it comes to sort of the appointment, whether it's race, class, or gender. So I think he was a casualty of the time, and I think absolutely he was championed by Cambridge because he was a sort of great answer to a very challenging problem. But I have a huge amount of sympathy with this man. He has been kind of pored over all week. There is more analysis of his work than I think I can think of any other academic that's been held to this standard. And I think we've allowed it to be hijacked by really nefarious forces.
But I think on that though, Rebecca, the scrutiny point, I hear what you're saying, that it's all happened this week. The point is the scrutiny should have happened years ago and over many years. The fact is this guy should have been knocked on the head pretty early on for the lies that he's been telling for such a long time.
Yes, I completely agree. This should have obviously been caught.
So it's just overdue.
Earlier. Perhaps overdue, but my concern is that this is now, and your guest made this point earlier, that this is now going to be used to sort of delegitimize the work of other, academics from minority backgrounds, and it sort of, is now sort of a really useful example for people who want to chip away at the diversity agenda, which this isn't. This does not prove that diversity and DEI is bad or wrong. This is a bad apple who was left poorly supervised during his research, and who went unchallenged. He was politically useful for an institution that has struggled with accusations of privilege.
Yeah.
But I think the interest is disproportionate.
Well, let's get Guto in. Guto, what do you reckon?
I always hesitate to disagree with Becca, but I think diversity inclusion has always been a sort of flawed, logical concept. I know the idea, I know the reasons why it's brought in, but it's gone too far. And there's an obsession. And if you were looking for somebody to remove a clot from your brain, you'd be looking for a great brain surgeon. You'd be looking at his or her academic qualifications and skill and experience. You would not be sort of judging them by the color of their skin or their sexual orientation or anything else. And why should that be such a driving force, not just at Cambridge, where you would think that, academic purity and, freedom of thought would trump all other considerations, but across our institutions, it's gone mad now. And I'm not ranting because I'm a pale male stale, as people can feel that they can say, to my face now. But if you think of young white men at the moment, they're looking at a world that looks like, anyone else should get there before them. And that's not right. There's no such thing as positive discrimination. Discrimination is discrimination.
Without generalising, Guto, let's just look at this very specific case. What do you think happened? Do you think that, as Rebecca suggested, this was going to be politically useful for Cambridge University, so they hired him and therefore didn't ask the right questions in the first place, or asked the questions and ignored them?
Yeah, from my understanding, what happens with some of this is you have a new category of people who are not there because they're brilliant academics, but they get made admissions tutors or sort of, some sort of non-academic role. And those are the people, almost like the HR divisions of universities, that have been obsessed with diversity and inclusion above academic achievement. So that would be a driving force. There's an element here as well of a fig leaf, that because they could not change the sort of nature of the entire establishment overnight, that they think if they get one high profile person who ticks a bunch of different boxes, then that somehow makes it better. And that flawed thinking is where you start to lose your way.
But you would assume, Guto, that if they had checked his CV, they would say that we cannot hire you because your academic qualifications don't stack up. So do you think they were complacent?
They were complacent on that, probably because they didn't want to find something that would stop them hiring this, seemingly kind of sexy in a sort of news kind of sense, kind of hire. But not just the academic qualifications, the claims about extreme running. I mean, you wonder whether they read the application or they check out the person, because somebody who makes a claim like that would make him one of the fastest, most, robust runners on planet Earth. It would be a talking point for me if I was going to employ him in a positive way. But, you'd soon find out that he's not capable of that. And if he lies about that, what else does he mislead you about?
It's an interesting one. It's a really interesting one. And I think the kind of capture of everyone's imaginations with this week is also just as kind of fascinating. Maybe it's because it's August, maybe it's because it's summer, but it's that kind of societal urge that, or that societal feel that there's been some sort of injustice done to us all by plagiarising your way to the top.
It was interesting hearing from one of the other professors earlier from Cambridge University, Rebecca, and he was saying we need to have a microphone in front of Cambridge University and they need to explain this. And that would help, would it not, stop the sort of circus surrounding this story to get some clarity and get some answers from them about exactly what happened.
Yes, absolutely. I think if anyone is at fault here, it is Cambridge University. They didn't do their due diligence. They didn't, rake over, his work thoroughly enough, potentially because it was sort of politically useful for them. They are the ones at fault here, and absolutely they should be defending, their institution and the rest of their, academic body, so that other people's work isn't called into question. This individual benefited from a sort of political climate, and I think the kind of embellishments about his life, speaks to someone who was maybe quite vulnerable, because the kind of impossibility of some of those claims would have rung alarm bells, as Guto says. But I think that's the fault here. It's an institution that was desperately trying to erase its history of kind of white privilege, and has hung this poor bloke out to dry. He's resigned. I don't know what else people will want to feel satisfied by this, but I think that point is completely right, that we need to hear from Cambridge University and they need to defend their decisions and explain what happened.